and welcome back to Immigration Ain't Easy. I'm Mo Goldman, and I am here with Ian Philabaum, who is the Director of Legal Organizing for Innovation Law Lab. And Ian has been in the trenches for some time now, doing God's work, as I would call it. Just been a force of fighting back against what I guess we would all call fascism and the, militarization of our government and ICE and, the organization that Ian works with, Innovation Law Lab, has been on the front lines of litigation, important litigation that helps us hopefully, and we'll find out more about where that litigation has gone, if anywhere, to find out, what are the protocols that are in place that we are seeing or have seen as far as the detention of individuals and the movement of individuals and the lack of transparency. And that is going to become a bigger and bigger issue moving forward with this, growth of ICE and ICE detention. This is a major fucking problem. And yes, we can use curse words on Immigration Ain't Easy because there's no rules. So thanks for joining me, Ian.
Thanks so much for having me, Mo. Pleasure to be.
No problem. So you grew up in Tucson, Arizona, correct?
That's right.
And tell me a little bit about growing up here. I know your father was in glass work. How did that all come about, and what was it like growing up in a house where your dad was blowing glass and in the art field?
Well, growing up in Tucson was awesome for me. So both my parents are actually artists. They met in the ceramics community here in Tucson. My dad was entering his foray, or I guess his lifelong obsession with glass at that time. But I think what that really meant for like my experience both growing up and what I learned from them in part had to do with how they were really involved in the community. So working with all the other artists at all times, everybody was like super poor and super passionate and like building things together and trying new things together and being creative and pushing boundaries. And it was a really cool environment to grow up in. And so like a lot, my weekends, for example, like it was always going to like art openings, and my sister and I learned very quickly how to like socialize with the adults and ask questions and be interrogated by people who were very interesting. But yeah, Tucson's a beautiful place.
And you attended University High School in Tucson?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Yeah, I had friends. What year did you graduate there?
97.
Okay. You're a little younger than me. So I don't know the graduating class from when you were there. I did read, though, it was pretty funny, that in 1984 your parents bought a Tasty Freeze drive-through. And it says that the kids would sometimes call it Tasty Glass. Did you call it Tasty Glass? Do you have any recollection of that? I read this in an article about your father.
I do not. We were tickled that it was a Tasty Freeze. The irony is that we didn't eat a lot of sweets in our households. Parents tried to keep everything like super healthy, so not a lot of ice cream going on.
That was like the opposite of my home. My dad, I was on the other side of Tucson, and he was an orthodontist. And man, when Girl Scout cookie time came, my dad would buy like 50 boxes or more, and we would freeze them. And I got super chubby.
See, I wanted to be your friend, and I wanted you to be able to get
Come hang out with me.
like
Yeah,
yeah,
I had I had it good, I mean, it probably wasn't good for my blood sugar, but oh my god, it was so crazy. So you wound up at one point moving to Guatemala for several months, and you taught students there, right? Guatemalan children.
It was part of a study abroad that I did
Okay.
while I was an undergraduate at the University of Arizona. I ended up getting my bachelor's degree in Latin American studies, and I did 2 semesters abroad, one in Guatemala and one in southern Mexico. And so while I was in Guatemala, part of that study abroad was an internship that I did at a local school, working with some pretty progressive young folks that were really critical of the education system in Guatemala and the fact that there were no after school programs that led to a lot of like social issues that people experienced in impoverished communities. And it was a really incredible experience. And, one of the parts of my life where I got to learn a lot about conditions, like sending conditions, why people move, and also like some like cultural nuances that I wouldn't have been privy to without that experience, including like the use of like the Spanish language that really helped for that.
And so, did doing this work in Guatemala and your upbringing in general help shape to the direction you decided to go in your professional life?
To a certain extent, absolutely. Definitely helped shape my worldview. Some people use the term radicalize. I don't. It's not my like. I think that word is used to marginalize often. So I
Exactly.
think it I think it like gave me like a more realistic understanding of the world. Obviously, we're still always trying to learn and understand more. But yeah, just like understanding more like the global context, uh, conditions, why people make decisions that they make, and also just that the American exceptionalism perspective is so flawed. Not only is it flawed, it's taught and it's ingrained in us, and we have to unpack it and we have to undo it and we have to relearn everything to really have a more critical analysis of what's happening and how we should be approaching things and what other questions we should be asking.
Ground that happens, you realize there's not a lot of exceptionalism. It's a shame. And when you mention, the word radicalized, I mean, that's been turned into a pejorative, term. And to call somebody radicalized is like an insult. But the reality is, being someone who's radical or being someone who's progressive, there's nothing wrong with caring about other people and the human rights that comes with it, and that I just, to me, it's so frustrating to see how the, the Trump administration and others have used that to try to weaponize the idea that you're a radical because you believe that everyone should have equal or similar human rights and dignity.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, that, and there's a lot of people that like embrace the term radical. And I can understand why historically, but I think as like context continues to like evolve, my response has been to like unpack that and want to like not set it up for like the weaponization that I think is so problematic, because I think one thing that we're really missing is like the ability to engage in in like generative conflict, not agreeing on things, but being willing and like interested in listening to the perspective and understanding and experiences of other people, so that we can actually like get somewhere. So like creating some type of like framework in which we're like in inherently different camps, I don't think is that helpful.
Hmm. Now, you before you joined Innovation Law Lab, you also got an opportunity to work with the Women's Initiative. Um, Talk to me a little bit about what that was or is, and what you did there.
Um, so when I graduated from the University of Arizona with my bachelor's degree, you know, I was it was later in life. I went to college in my late 20s, so I was already in my 30s, and I guess I was like, the assumption is like, okay, now I'm supposed to go get a job, and I was looking for things that I was interested in. I didn't really know how to do it, and I was in a partnership at the time with somebody that lived in Oakland, and so I moved to Oakland, and I found a job. It was my first job at a nonprofit, actually. I've been working with nonprofits ever since, and that was in 2011. So living in a new city in the United States was a new thing for me. I grew up, here in Tucson, kind of like a poor artist family. Like this is what I knew. I mean, to your point earlier, like studying abroad, like broadened my worldview, encouraged me to like go check out new things. And I think Oakland, and we're working at the Women's Initiative was like a big part of that. I was able to use like my Spanish language skills and some semblance of community organizing skills, and learned how to work at a nonprofit, which is a pretty important thing as well. But I was there for 2.5 years, learned a ton, changed my life, learned, I think it was like my first, it really helped me frame like the good and the bad of nonprofits, how problematic they can be just inherently as like a part of like this system that everybody relies on, but like underinvests in, and what we're
Underfunded, yeah.
yeah, exactly. And how hard it can be to work with them, and what we ask of folks, like generally, like in these service realms, and it was enlightening. I will say that I'm grateful for my experience, and it became a really important stepping stone to like make some decisions about what was good and what else I needed and why I needed to move on.
What was the mission of the Women's Initiative? What, or is it still around?
No,
No.
no.
Okay. What was it? What did you guys do there?
Uh, Basically helping women start their own businesses, helping entrepreneurial women like get their business plan put together, give them access to coaches and consultants. Think about the overlap between like their personal and professional lives. There was like an income threshold to be eligible for services through the program, so people were generally um, of lower income brackets, served a lot of like non-white populations, Spanish speaking populations. So it was, and to do so in the Bay Area was pretty fascinating. I think one of like the things that I was struck most by, that it took me a long time to really wrap my head around, is how giant corporations that are so predatory in so many different ways, and in social, political, economic life, use nonprofits as a means to like make themselves look good and get access to like all the requisite or available tax breaks. And that was true in that circumstance as well. And I was really put off by that, and it kind of helped me learn like another filter that I wanted to like apply as I was looking at what organizations I wanted to be involved with moving forward.
Did you have, or have you ever had the opportunity to look back and see if any of the women achieved success through what you and the Women's Initiative was doing?
Yeah, yeah. Through social media, I still see some people's businesses are active, and a lot of them, a lot of people that I worked with were entrepreneurial by nature generally, and I'm certain have moved on into other ventures. It was a really fun, exciting, cool, creative space, and it was really community based, which is like a through line to the things where I've really enjoyed participating, and I definitely enjoyed that aspect of it.
And then after that, you went back to school for your graduate degree at the University of Arizona.
That's correct.
Um, and then following that, you did you start working for Innovation Law Lab afterwards, or when did you get hooked into Innovation Law Lab?
No, that's a good question. And so for my master's, I did a practicum where I was doing research on migration patterns in southern Mexico. So working with like migrant shelters, aid foundations, and doing direct interviews, looking at spaces of safety and insecurity and how people make decisions based on their understanding of the environment that they're moving through. And while I was at one shelter, well, I met a lot of people while I was working at various shelters in southern Mexico. And then when I came back, I finished my degree, I graduated, and a friend of mine who's an immigration attorney in California now was here in Tucson and said, "Hey, I just saw this man speak at this event at the university. We have to go to Dilley, Texas." And so we jumped in a car and we went and we volunteered in Dilley, Texas in May 2015, right when the Cara Pro Bono project had launched. That's when they had opened the new, what the government referred to as a family residential center, what we call baby jail, in far south Texas, where they had detained at times up to over 2,000 mothers and children. And so we volunteered with that project for a week. And while I was there, I ran into a woman that I had met at one of the shelters in southern Mexico while I was doing my master's research. And it's not like I wouldn't have been struck by the circumstances and like the horrific nature of a jail for moms and their children in the first place, but really brought it home to have a personal relationship with somebody that was in there. I was aware that she was in there. I've been made aware from a friend, and so made sure to meet with her. But that was actually that May 2015, because my friend suggested that we go volunteer at Dilley, is actually like how I went in there. The person that she had seen speak at that event at the University of Arizona happened to be Stephen Manning, who had come down from Portland, Oregon, who is now the executive director of Innovation Law Lab and my boss. And that was the first time I ever heard his name.
And yeah, Stephen, I recall him speaking at the University of Arizona, and I cannot remember if it was after that. I think it was because he spoke of a young girl, and I'll never forget the story, and I'm sure you know it, Estrella. And he told that story about the young girl who was in detention for it was almost a year at that, or I don't remember how long she was in Karnes City, Texas, and how she was suffering horribly with like multiple medical problems, and her mother was diagnosed with PTSD, and anxiety and a whole bunch of issues, and they were just sitting in detention for months and months on end. And I think what people often don't realize is that the cruelty has been in place for a really long time, and it's not just the Trump administration. This was happening under President Obama.
That's correct. Yeah. Well, I ended up, so after I volunteered in Dilley, a position opened for the project coordinator. I really admired the person that was there in that role. They were the coordinator when I volunteered. And I applied and I got the job and packed up my stuff in my little Honda Civic and just drove out to Dilley, Texas. And I worked there for a year. And it was a really hard year. It was a really impactful year. It was it was the first year where, so previous to the family residential center, the baby jail in Dilley, Texas, and Carnes, there was the family detention center in Artesia, New Mexico. And I love reading about it. I find it really inspiring, despite how horrific the conditions were and the legal violations that were incurred during that time. But watching people learn about this thing and understand how terrible it is, and they had to do something about it, and come from all over the country and come together and start organizing and coming up with a plan and a system with how they were going to attack this terrible uh, institution, edifice, practice, and that experience, which successfully shut down that detention center in Artesia, New Mexico, unfortunately led to the government, quote unquote, cleaning up their act, right? Painting the turd gold, so that they could portray it as passable, based on like legal requirements and public image. Um, that part was terrible, but what all the lawyers and organizers and activists and concerned community members learned in Artesia was how to come together to attack this monster, and that eventually turned into the Cara Pro Bono Project, which became a behemoth of a project to provide legal services to every single person detained in those family detention centers in South Texas, both Karnes City and Dilley. And that was just truly an inspiring thing to watch unfold, and to be a part of. I met lawyers and activists and organizers and legal assistants from all over the country that came in big groups. We did orientations, taught them about our system, learned about them and their work back home, and created this big network that started sharing and like multi-directionally, and following the practice that my boss Stephen Manning, the executive director from Law Lab, was integral in creating, which was called massive collaborative representation. Like, how can we bring all these different people together from so many different places on the ground and remote, and apply all their skill sets into a system to be able to leverage that towards providing services for every single need that we encounter, and fighting back simultaneously against the bad thing that's happening with everything that we learn in the process.
How many different organizations does Innovation Law Lab work with or collaborate with? Is it just too many to count, or?
It Fortunately, I couldn't give you a number. It's a ton, and we used to work with more than we probably do now. We've whittled down our programs, based on resources and changes in the ecosystems, right? But we've had the privilege of working with organizations, partners all over the country, national partners that we still work with, but we've run projects in Washington, Oregon, California, New Mexico, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Georgia, Florida, South Carolina, Kansas, well, Kansas City, so mostly Missouri actually, um, but all over the country. And
So they've touched
well,
everywhere. Now
well,
was
for us, I think, like we have like a particular approach and context and skill set that we think that we bring to it, but you get so much by being a part of a coalition, of a collaborative, and it really helps us fulfill our mission of meeting the need and decentering the lawyer, and really framing the lawyer and the law as tools to help us achieve a goal that's much bigger. They're a really key tool in this process, especially when we're focused on mostly legal aspects of as a primary point of engagement. But it's really helped shape our understanding of how to participate in the ecosystem generally, but in different spaces, and helped our work evolve to land in the projects that we currently are managing.
and when resources are finite, and we know that the government has unlimited resources, and now they're going to have even more unlimited resources, with the billions upon billions of dollars being allocated, collaboration is critical. Um, Stephen, tell me a little bit about Stephen Manning. Like, what, um, how would you describe him as an advocate, a lawyer, a human being, a
Mo,
friend?
you're really putting me in a tricky spot. Really nail this question, huh?
Well, you can
Uh,
say what's on your mind.
oh well, I let me start by telling you this. Um, I worked at the baby jail in Dilley, Texas, for a year, and it was hard, and you get tired. There since have been people that worked there longer than that, and just knowing what a year was like, I really admire them. But of all the people I met and trying to figure out what I was going to do when I needed to move on, um, I loved Stephen's approach to the work and some conversations that we had had about what the application that our project was applying in Dilley and how that could look in other spaces. Thinking about how when we got to a point in Dilley where we were getting everybody out, 99.9% of the people were getting released. But a lot of them were going to these jurisdictions where the immigration courts had terrible judges that were going to deny all these cases regardless of the merits. And so, what do we do about that? How do we organize with lawyers and other organizations to make sure that the bad thing that's inevitably going to happen there doesn't? And how can we rebuild power to undo the toxic practices of those immigration courts? And then subsequently, how do we take the organization that we've seen in these family immigration prisons and build out practices at problematic immigration prisons for adults? It's not like people weren't working in these places, but they certainly weren't getting the same amount of attention that we were seeing at the family immigration prisons. And I really liked that forward thinking approach. And so I asked him if I could come work with him without understanding if there was a place to do work with him. I was like, let's go to Atlanta because he had talked about that before. And so I proactively asked him if he would be interested in letting me work with him because I was so impressed by him and thought he was so incredible, like with his intellect and his legal acumen and his approach to collaborative work. And I still feel that way about him today. And it's been really, I've learned so much, like watching like Innovation Law Lab grow as an organization and navigate all the challenges that you see as a nonprofit and working in so many collaborative spaces. So I remain inspired and grateful for his
And I
leadership.
think if anyone wants to listen to him, I think there's like a TED talk of him telling Estrella's story. And I can guarantee you that there will not be a dry eye from anyone that listens to him tell the story. I mean, at least that was my experience where everyone in the room was, pretty emotional after listening to him speak.
I agree.
Yeah.
And that TEDx talk is still available online. It and another piece of it is like there's like a simplicity and a practicality in the message as well, and it became a part of how we talked about our work at Law Lab generally moving forward from that point. It's like this idea, like when we're going into these immigration courts with these terrible immigration judges, working with partners, like when we were starting these projects there, like our kind of motto or tagline or our mission, our vision was that every case that should win does win every time. And it seems so simple and it seems so practical to me. And I loved it. And everybody knew that was still like going to be an uphill battle.
Exactly. Yeah.
But that was 2016 when we started those projects. And things have only gotten harder and things have only gotten worse. And honestly, just thinking about it right now, like that vision remains true and it remains reasonable and it remains like the thing that we should be focusing on and working like hard to obtain. But man, it's the conditions are worse than ever.
Let's talk about the conditions. In the last, I think I read 12 days. In this, we're recording this on October 15th, October 16th. I'm a day off. In the last 12 days, I was reading that 3 people have died in ICE detention. Um, for the listener who is not fully apprised and doesn't know about what conditions are like in a detention center, I want to primarily focus on the family detention that you were, um, you know, right in the front lines of. Um, for people who don't know about what family detention is like, can you describe what those facilities are like? At least, like, is it, you hear family detention, you think, oh, it's got to be nicer than other detention centers. What was it like in Dilley or in Carnes?
I mean, disclaimer: it's been a long time,
Yeah,
and since my time working there have been so many people that have come and worked so hard and know these details better. So I want to acknowledge and appreciate that. But a couple like top line takeaways that I think are really important to understand. Um, they the government would characterize these detention facilities as having everything that they need to take care of kids, right? That's the primary concern. So there's a school. So there's a cafeteria that makes healthy food. And there's medical services. And while there was a building that had computers in it and teachers, and while there were medical facilities and there like was this cafeteria, their primary goal when they built these places was to make it look good, so it would pass the smell test. And the lived reality of people that are subjected to those conditions um, was invariably over time, by the end of anybody's experience being detained in these detention centers, they're complaining about the exact same violations and exact same conditions and exact same legal problems, due process problems that we hear about in these medium security prisons that are converted for ICE detention. Did they look cleaner? Yes. Did they have slightly more medicine because there was kids there? Probably. But at the end of the day, they put 500 to 1,000 kids inside this compound, and they all get sick. It's a no-brainer. They all get sick. And simultaneously, their mother is trying to navigate their immigration case with a lack of resources and a really small, stressed out nonprofit staff that's doing their best and having good results. But at the same time, trying to like take care of their kids who are having human needs and human concerns, like everything that you would expect for kids that grow up in your household, the kids that you have or you have seen in your life. They have all those same experiences while being traumatized in a detention center. And everything is exacerbated even more than what you would see in those adult detention centers because of the nature of that responsibility for those children, and because of the nature of what kids experience inevitably as they are growing up. These children grew up in jail. They all got sick. They all got traumatized. And that trauma was shared by their mother. And no kid can't see their mom going through that and not experience vicariously or take vicariously from their pain as well. And it compounds upon itself. And in terms of like the medical service provision, like I don't care what anybody says, it was so bad. It was so bad. Like, who are these contractors that take these jobs? Like, it's a question that we've been asking ourselves, and I'd love to like talk about that later about detention centers in general. But
sure.
they're given limited resources. They're given a tall task, an impossible task. You can't care for these people. They're going to be ill physically and psychologically for having been placed in these terrible places in the first place. And the staff that work at these places aren't trained. They're there to fill requirements to make sure that the company that owns the private prison company that owns the prison, in the case of Delhi, it was Core Civic, the largest private prison company in the entire world, was making millions and millions of dollars. And the people that are in charge and making the decisions are never on site. And the people that are dealing with the reality that people face, the mothers and the kids, don't know how to do anything. And so every time there was a medical issue in the trailers where we provided legal services, the first responders were the legal service providers. I can't tell you how many people I personally attended to that were having epileptic seizures.
Jeez.
It's harrowing. And
So they
nobody,
provide the bare minimum,
the bare
is what
minimum,
you're saying.
the bare minimum. We would be yelling out, call 911, and they'd be yelling at us. We're like, don't call 911, don't call 911, because they want to handle everything in house and they don't want to have a record of the bad things happening within their detention center camp. So that was a really long,
How
emotional
did
answer to
you? Yeah, but I mean, it raises another question I was going to pose to you, which is, doing this work, brings a lot of secondary trauma. I talk about it a lot with others who come on and do interviews with me. And how do you keep yourself grounded uh, when you're on the ground doing this work and seeing day after day so much hardship and cruelty? Like, how do you keep yourself in a state of mind where you can go back the next day and do it again?
um, I got that question a lot when I was actually like working at Dilly, and then a couple of years past that too. And I recognized that that was like a thing, and I knew it was really important, but I didn't really fully absorb it. Um, and yeah, it took its toll. It took its toll. I mean, that's to say, like in the beginning, I just didn't. I ignored it and I absorbed it. I absorbed all the bad parts of what I was experiencing, and it took a couple of years to really fully understand that and unpack that. And I'm really grateful to the people that pushed me to do that, despite my stubbornness, because I was quite stubborn for a while.
Where did you go after being down there? Did you move to a different part of the country? Did you continue to do this work in a different location?
I moved to Portland afterwards to work with Steven, and we launched a couple projects, one in Atlanta and one in Charlotte, which at the time were like two of the places where we were seeing the diaspora going, of asylum seeking diaspora going, and in particular, a lot of families that we knew from family detention were going there, whose cases we would be able to follow up with and think about the through line of the legal work. So I moved to Portland, where Stephen is based, and helped him build projects in Atlanta and Charlotte.
So describe the process. Like, people, they migrate to Charlotte. What was the project that you and Steven worked on at that point for people who went to Charlotte? Like, how did that process go?
Well, we had a few contacts in the area. Um, Primarily, we started off with Atenas Burrola, a friend of mine, who is still in the field doing the work. Uh, and She organized a bunch of like local private practitioners and nonprofit organizations doing legal work, primarily legal work and some organizing, and bringing them together and saying like, hey, we want to propose this idea where we take a cohort of cases of people that we know that came from this family detention center that are going to go in front of these judges, that you all know better than anybody are terrible and are
In
going to
Georgia too, yeah.
exactly and are going to like rule poorly on the merits of these claims. And collectively, we can build practices to figure out how to put forth the best claims possible and use each other as like a support group and like a brain trust to make their applications as strong as possible, and also challenge the power of the immigration court by doing it together, learning from the practices, understanding that we're probably going to have to go through appeals um, and that was the initial proposal. And a lot of the local practitioners were interested in it because they deal with these judges on a daily basis and know how terrible they are. And they're like, oh, we're going to try to push back on these on the power that the imbalance of power that they wield against us every day. Absolutely, and of course, they're good lawyers and they care about people. So that was the overlap there. It was a really really cool idea, but putting it into like context, we started this in like early fall 2016. The election was November 2016. Trump wins. Come January, there's Attorney General Jeff Sessions
Yeah.
is imposing like all these new rules on the asylum
Restrictions.
process, and they flipped the priority list for cases in the immigration court. And so one of the problems that we were seeing is that people were going from first or second masters to their individual in like 45 days, which wasn't enough time to like get everything organized and present the strongest claim. And so that was one of the primary things that we were going to try to tackle. And they just pulled the rug out from underneath that plan, and they pushed those cases back 2 years. And anyway, the timeline got stretched out. The strategy had to change entirely. So right when we got started, the conditions of the environment changed.
I'm guessing you probably came across Marty Rosenbluth.
Of course, we love Mark.
Marty's the best. Yeah, I remember. I mean, I've read time and again about his trials and tribulations of having to go into the courts in that area and how awful the judges are. I mean, it's like the Atlanta court is got some of the lowest, if not the lowest, total asylum rates out there. Um, and so you're the Innovation Law Lab now. What is your like? Do you have a primary focus under in the current environment that we're living in? And if so, what is that?
Um, yeah. So, we're talking about 2016. It's been a long time. And since then, one of the projects that we started was in the Portland Immigration Court. Um, and it's interesting. Like at the time, a lot of people were like, "Oh, the Portland Immigration Court. Actually, the judges there, they're not as bad. Like, why would you start a project there?" And one of the reasons that we were thinking is like, well, we need to keep them there, and we still need to push them to be even better, and like
Better.
build this community, and build more power, and build better practices. And we have watched the court deteriorate over time ever since then, because very intentionally the court system been hasn't been it's not dismantled, it's been manipulated.
Due process is being dismantled
The
and
process is being dismantled,
case law and everything else.
yeah, partially through manipulation of how the individual spaces the courts operate themselves. And so one of the key projects was representation in the Portland Immigration Court. And Innovation Law Lab was part of an initiative to work with legislators in like the state of Oregon to provide funding for people that are in removal proceedings or vulnerable to be placed in removal proceedings in the Portland Immigration Court, and is now part of the Equity Corps of Oregon, or ECHO, which provides universal representation in the Portland Immigration Court to people vulnerable to deportation or to being placed in removal proceedings, or I guess primarily those in removal proceedings. So that has become a massive project, which we are a founding member and an integral part. Our case management system, LawLab Pro, is the primary system used to manage all those immigration cases. Um, we do a ton of organizing with community organizations, community-based organizations in all parts, like throughout Oregon, that have trust in the community that is or could be vulnerable to deportation practices, to make sure that they get navigated into this community. And there's, based on like timelines, dates of like master calendar hearings, there's a filter and prioritization process, and we work with myriad attorneys from myriad organizations in order to provide those services. It's not entirely Law Lab, but that's one of like the biggest projects that we are currently a part of. We, as an organization, as you mentioned earlier, we are a partner in various litigation efforts around the country, some at the national level, some regional, some local, challenging anti-immigrant practices, violations of the Constitution, essentially, from the federal government in terms of like the practice of immigration law for people in immigration proceedings. And then the project that I am focused on, which is currently it's called the Torrance Pro Bono Project. We provide legal orientation and services to people detained in the Torrance County Detention Facility in Estancia, New Mexico, which is a rural location where we often see ICE prisons placed. And we work with amazing partners throughout the state of New Mexico, legal service providers, activists, and other community-based organizations to both work with people, mitigate the harm that's done in immigration detention. And we're part of a coalition called Dignity Not Detention New Mexico that's trying to pass legislation that would make it unlawful for public bodies in the state of New Mexico to contract directly with ICE for the purpose of immigration detention, essentially making it unlawful for counties, cities, or the state to be pass-throughs for an ICE contract that would ultimately land with a private prison company so that they can deflect accountability and responsibility for the harms that they're actually doing inside.
Do you think that is the strategy that should be employed across the country, or does it depend on the specific state and the specific state's legislature and the composition of that legislature?
I think it's a good strategy. I think it's a good piece of the puzzle. And looking at like the whole of the country and that it's a state by state strategy, it would inherently be iterative because you're working with political bodies that have power structures and sway in certain directions, right? And so in New Mexico, there's a certain advantage that we have working there that we would not necessarily have, for example, in Arizona currently. So another key thing to understand about this type of bill, it's a ban on an intergovernmental service agreement, which is basically creating the pass-through of the public body between ICE and the private prison company. So it makes it illegal for a public body to be involved in ICE detention, but it doesn't mean that the federal government can't contract directly with the private prison company, like we're currently seeing in Marana, Arizona, a suburb of Tucson. And so it doesn't end immigration detention in New Mexico in its entirety, but in New Mexico, it would effectively shut down one of the 3 ICE detention centers, which would be a massive win because it's a horrific facility that well documented for its abuses, both in terms of due process and human rights. And it's an organizing opportunity to really get the greater population to understand what is happening and why it's actually important and why we want to reject the premise of immigration detention in our backyards at its base. And so the momentum that would come out of a legislative win for passing a bill that would shut the door or end the contract with ICE for one of the 3 detention centers would be a massive injection of momentum and success that we're currently not seeing in a lot of avenues in the immigration space. And so we're really encouraged with the progress that we've made over years, even though the bill hasn't passed on several occasions now. it's a long process of really getting people to understand why it's important and addressing some of the complementary concerns that we do have to actually take really seriously if we ever intend to be successful.
Let's talk about the proliferation of ICE detention and what the future holds. You mentioned Marana, and what Marana, Arizona, is this community outside of Tucson. It's northwest of Tucson. Has traditionally been a farming community, but over time we're seeing other industry move in. Um, you know, middle class community for the most part, maybe some upper middle class as well. And it has a prison, a state prison that was shut down in 2023, and was purchased for $15 million by a company called MTC, Management and Training Corporation, based out of Utah. And all indications is that they plan to convert it into an ICE detention facility that can hold up to, at this point, 500 bodies, and possibly expand to 1,000 from what I've read. Um, what what sort of strategies do you think should be employed by communities who don't want ICE in their neighborhoods, in their backyards, and putting detention centers there? Like, is there a framework that you think is the best framework that communities should engage in? And if so, what is it?
That's a really great question, Mo. That's a really good question. And it's something that we've really been trying to tackle in Torrance County in New Mexico.
Yeah.
I'm going to do my best um, to characterize some of the work that we've been doing as like some examples of success, and some ideas to piggyback on. They should all be interrogated. Um, we One of the reasons that we started our project in Torrance County, to give you some background, is that we've been involved in shutdown projects in all those states I listed earlier. Right? We joined these coalitions and we share our software and our approach and some technical approaches that we've developed over the years, and some work and some are, every context is different, right? And we learn a ton and it's been wonderful. And we are able to document all the bad things, and we're able to make our argument for why this terrible immigration prison should be shut down. And invariably, we make incredible headway with everyone that is already in agreement with that mission. And then you run into these roadblocks that are very practical, very nuanced, and very hard to get around. And the principal ones you hear are economic:
Jobs.
jobs and taxes. Jobs and taxes. And I have to admit, I'll speak for myself. I downplayed them. I think we as a network have downplayed them as well, because we were so right about the other things that they weren't as important. And we were right, and we are right. Our righteous argument that these places are terrible and should be shut down is correct. However, it's missing a lot of like really key variables, and I think that the suggestion is to view those as opportunities. And so when the argument is that, like, for example, when the Irwin County Detention Center in Wasilla, Georgia was shut down because a terrible man was doing terrible things and taking advantage of ICE, and ICE was facilitating him doing these terrible things there. The place was subject to a Senate inquiry in the United States Senate, and a big hullabaloo, as it should have received, and the ICE contract there was canceled. Several members of the community however, complained that after the fact they just lost their jobs and they didn't have any other alternatives, and they wish that they had been consulted. Uh, and that's like a really light touch on a really complex conversation that happened over time with a lot of people. I was not there for it. But it's a really important reminder that like there's a lot more at play. And while it's the right thing to do, it's an opportunity to think about how those other things can be not only taken into consideration, but turned into opportunities that make our argument for why this place should be closed down is even stronger. Now, one of the people that worked at that jail in Georgia told one of my good colleagues, Ariel Prado, I wish I could work at a place that didn't hurt my soul so much. And at the core of that is what we consistently hear from everybody that works the low-level jobs at immigration prisons. And I wouldn't be surprised if it was consistent at prisons in general. They don't like their job. It's actually really hard. When we talk about vicarious trauma, they experience it too. And it affects them, and there's a ripple effect on their families. And why do they take that job? We were talking about that earlier. Why do they take this job? And for many people, it might be their best option. Well, in Torrance County, one thing that we've learned, there's not a lot of job opportunities there.
Yeah.
And the model for these private prisons companies is you come in, go find out what the local Walmart is paying, pay $2 more an hour, and you're the best employer in the county. Doesn't matter how hard it is, like you're going to have a steady pay, maybe some benefits for your family, and the place where you live receives some tax revenue. And those variables matter. So when people don't want to work at these places, but they feel compelled to, like they don't have a better option, and everybody says like the number one thing is taking care of their family. Then why aren't there more options? And who are the people that are responsible for representing these people that should be fighting for them to have the options that they actually want? And so in Torrance County, we created the Torrance County Listening Project. And we went around and we started knocking on doors of people that live in Torrance County, around the area where the detention facility is. And we started asking them questions, surveys. And the questions, generally speaking, what do you like about living in Torrance County? What's hard about living in Torrance County? And if you could change anything about Torrance County, what would it be? Nobody says they want to work at a prison. And one giant takeaway is that people are really willing to talk. We're not going to agree with everybody on anything. And we're not necessarily going to agree with people that live in these places on immigration. But we probably agree on like 80% of other stuff. And when you get down to the nitty-gritty and talk about people's lives and their livelihoods and what's important to them, what did we hear about? We heard about access to medical care and medical services, emergency management services, good jobs with good pay, job training, maintaining the beauty of rural life, water issues. People are concerned about access to water. And so these are all things that we can all have in common. And when we think about the rural-urban divide, that comes into play when we have these conversations, because a lot of the times we go into these rural counties and say what should be happening with their jail and how they should be making decisions. And they say, like, we don't need you outsiders coming in and doing this. Well, we can actually have a more generative conversation, and honestly, a more respectful conversation, if we understand their position and what their needs are. And so the idea now, and we turned those surveys into what we call the Torrance County People's Platform. And to complement the advocacy work we're doing around immigration and immigration detention in New Mexico, we're also sharing the results of this survey and this People's Platform as a means to share with legislators to say, this is what your constituents want. This is what your constituents need. Here are the coffers of funds that are available for you to pursue and invest in what people want. And blindly subscribing to immigration detention is the only form of economic development in these counties is not the right thing to do, because that's not actually what they want. That is a decision that's made out of fear. And what people need, what we need to challenge people to do is be bold, to actually go talk to people, ask them what they want, and use that as a means to develop something that is generative towards creating a beautiful space and not a space that makes decisions out of fear.
So, is the strategy of the private prison industry primarily to focus on these underserved areas because, number one, maybe the land is cheaper, the property's cheaper, they can get cheaper labor and offer them wages that are still higher than Walmart or whatever, but it still looks more appeasing to them?
Yes,
It's
yes,
part of the
yes.
master plan. Um, how much and like on average do private prisons nowadays get paid to house one individual per day?
Um, so it varies based on contract.
Okay. What's the range approximately?
Um, I don't think I could answer that question with a degree of certainty that makes me feel comfortable. But what I
Sure.
can do is I can provide you like an example for what we're currently seeing based on what we
Sure.
know in Torrance County. I will say this, that when we see a growth or an increase in the number of detention centers in the South, it's directly related to economics for the private prison companies to minimize their costs in endeavoring uh, these these very lucrative contracts with the federal government for immigration detention. Uh, New Mexico is a very poor state, and Torrance County is a small, less populated county that experiences higher than average levels of poverty. So it meets all those marks. Um, Currently, the contract is includes a minimum bed guarantee. So there are approximately 990 beds in the Torrance County Detention Facility. Um, Core Civic, the largest private immigration prison in the world, that owns and operates this facility, has negotiated a contract in which they are paid for a minimum of 505 beds being filled by ICE, regardless of how many people are in the facility. And then above 505 people, when there are more people in there, they get paid extra on top of that. And that currently equates to, at the 505 range, approximately $2 million a month. And so we can do the math there. And I know that there's a really interesting number in the per person and per bed, but I want to step back and like think about what's actually happening here in terms of like why ICE and these private prison companies are such good bed partners in the private prison business. In 2017, Core Civic shut down the Torrance County Detention Facility um, because they weren't making enough money. ICE determined that they needed this facility because its proximity to the border, etc. And Core Civic leveraged that to negotiate that current contract that you hear now. So from 2017 to 2019, when it was shut down, Estancia, New Mexico, the town in which that prison resides, experienced economic hardship because Core Civic held them and the federal government hostage for a more lucrative contract, which they received. And when the contract they negotiated for was 714 beds as a minimum payment on a monthly basis, regardless of how many people there were in there. And at that time, in those early years, 2019, 2020, there was an average of about 120 to 150 people being detained there at any given time. But they were being paid for a minimum of 714. In 2022, the Office of the Inspector General did an investigation into the facility due to complaints that were being filed by organizations like ours, and they found that the private prison company was negligent in violation of the terms of their contract, in terms of basic service provisions, staffing, security, all the things that the private prison companies sell themselves at being so good at. And subsequently, because of those shortcomings that were highlighted by the federal government, they were docked in their contract down to 505, which is still way over 50% or way over 100% more than that actual absolute number of people that were detained there at any given time. And so the private prison company has taken advantage of the narrative and the need to pack these places with people in the name of national security to line their pockets at the expense of the people that they detain on the inside, while not even complying with the requirements that they're not being held accountable to either.
What bucket does this money come from out of the federal government? These are taxpayer dollars that
Yes,
are being paid
that's correct.
to private prisons, even though 300 or more beds aren't filled. That they're getting paid at 500 and whatever five, and there's maybe 120 people in the facility. That's insane. I mean, I think when you start to think about the numbers and how much, like you said, don't look at it per individual, look at it at how much they're going to make at the end of each month, and the profit margin that they're, going to have. Wow, that is an astounding amount of money that our federal government is paying these private prisons that the taxpayers are footing the bill for.
And the private prisons remain non-compliant with numerous provisions of the contracts that they signed, both with the public body for the intergovernmental service agreement contracts, or those that directly contract with the federal government. They're also in violation of several aspects of immigration law and sort of in terms of due process. ICE is ultimately responsible for them, but the service providers, I don't know if they're fudging the numbers, or ICE just doesn't care, or the idea is that it doesn't really matter as long as the people are in there. And we're seeing those numbers go up, which means that all of the conditions, the issues, and due process violations that we've always been hearing about have only been increasing and exacerbated.
Wow. Well, let me let me end on I think a more positive note. The website is innovationlawlab.org. And so anyone who's listening, if they want to read more about what Innovation Law Lab does and maybe even support the organization, you can go onto the website. Is there anything else you want to note about that, or make a pitch for?
Yeah, I just want to piggyback on what we were talking about that occurs in rural communities and
Within that. Yeah,
the
sure.
opportunity that we have there. That applies generally. We're hearing now that that things are so bad, and people are seeing ICE harm and abuse people in the news and in front of our faces on a daily basis now. And it seems like people are coming to a new understanding of what ICE is and what their actual goal is, and what their role is societally, and a growing rejection of that. And it's unfortunate that it has to get so bad for us to really start pushing back, but we're here. And I think that that's a great opportunity. And so when we think about like like talking to residents of rural communities and asking them what they want and pushing on legislators to do that, the same responsibility and opportunity lies with each of us. Because just like we're seeing here in Tucson, ICE is coming to your backyard. And so our job is to organize and to come together and figure out how we can both proactively reject their entrance into our community and be able to opine on what it is that we actually want and how we believe it can collectively be achieved. And I think it's a really long term, and it's going to be really hard to do in terms of the approach. But I think that's that's something I'm personally really trying to lean into, and those interactions with community members about what can be generative in a time of conflict is like a tiny little light of optimism that I think we,
Sense of optimism.
yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I appreciate you taking all this time to educate myself and the listener. This is the important aspect of doing podcasts like this now and having these discussions, because I think, the more that people get educated about what's happening on the ground from subject experts like yourself, the better. Again, information and knowledge is key.
Well, I really appreciate you doing what you do, Mo, and being such a great community member. And it was really nice talking to you.
Well, and thank you. I always say to my daughter Emma, who will edit this and make us sound good. So yeah, thanks so much for your time. Again, the podcast is Immigration Ain't Easy. You can go to innovationlawlab.org and check it out. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Mo.